Hello, welcome. Welcome everybody to our um, regular live webinar. This is a special one for Tu B'Shvat. Chag Sameach, Chag Tu B'Shvat Sameach to everyone. It's Erev Tu B'Shvat here in Israel. I'm Jay Shofet from the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. Um, Really happy everybody's with us today from all over. Let us know where you're from. We're always psyched to see everybody. Oops, I'm already moving forward. Just trying to find here we go. Please tell us where you are in the chat. Thanks, everybody. Um, and thank everybody for your support, for your engagement. We had a pretty good year in terms of our work in development in SPNI over the last over 2025. Challenging year in most ways, though. Here on the ground in Israel, we're going to be talking about tree planting in Israel, forestation or afforestation, as we call it, which is the planting of trees. But we're also going to be talking at the end about some of the other planting that we do in SPNI and for the environments and habitats of Israel. So, wow, thanks everybody for letting us know who you are, where you are. I'm doing the webinar tonight. I am the guest as well as the host, so I'm not going to be able to, so much to monitor the chat. Working with us in the background is Naama Gat, working out of her home in central Israel, and Naama can be monitoring if you have questions and stuff. Please, everybody, know that I will not be seeing questions during this webinar, but it's great to see so many people here from all over, I assume. And we're going to get undergo in just a minute or two. People are still joining. Uh, Hope everybody's thinking about Tu B'Shvat today, wherever you are, or at least this evening in North America. An interesting holiday, which is yet another way that there's a sort of call for stewardship, wise stewardship of the environment uh, in Jewish sources. And we're not going to get into the origins or meaning of Tu B'Shvat so much. At least historically, we did that last week with Nigel Savage. Fascinating webinar. It's already on our site if you want to see it. You go into our website with Nature Israel and webinars, and you get into past webinars on the drop down. Very much worth seeing last week's webinar. And this is a special one because we're having a campaign for mindful tree planting. I'm going to be just starting now. I'll move into our formal talk as we start. Um, we for Tu B'Shvat now for the last several years have been running a mindful tree planting campaign, kind of as a counterpoint to the, I would say, traditional, which is not to say knee-jerk tree planting campaigns that have been running by not just the JNF, but of course that's traditional for so long, but by many organizations that want you to plant for various reasons. And we also want you to plant for various reasons, but not plant forests. Plant trees that are appropriate to their habitats and in the right place and in the right way and with the right trees. And I guess with no further ado, we will get into this. So welcome everybody from everywhere. Wow, I have 40 comments already and 100 people here. So really welcome everybody. It's heartwarming to have everybody with us so often. A webinar last week, a webinar this week, and then every couple weeks with a break over the summer. So thank you again, everybody. I'm Jay Shofet coming to you from Tel Aviv. Appreciate everybody's participation and interest tonight. And what I want to say is that this webinar is going to be dealing with one of the major conservation issues in Israel today, an issue with tremendous environmental consequences, and one whose scope, SPNI thinks, is completely disproportionate to the really minor place that this issue has in Israeli public discourse. Me'az u'letamid. In other words, in Israeli discourse from the beginning of the state of Israel and up until today. It's not thought about much. There are a lot of assumptions about afforestation, about planting forests in Israel, which were common at the beginning of the state and which, to some degree, are still with us. And SPNI thinks that it's time, 2026 for sure, to rethink some of the original assumptions and thinking about afforestation in Israel. Now, we know afforestation it's been established, it's a fact in Israel, and KKL, the Karen Kemet Israel, Jewish National Fund, which is responsible for tree planting in Israel, afforestation in Israel, that is, as per charter with the government of Israel from the early 1950s. The JNF has many, many merits, but we do think it's worth re-examining some of the assumptions behind the afforestation issues in Israel, and we'll get to that right now. Um, and I just want to say, actually, before we get going, that um, I'm not an expert, but I have been studying this issue for a while. The 11 years I've been in SPNI. And in 2019, Alon Rothschild, our director of biodiversity in SPNI, a very respected figure in the Israeli environmental movement, published a very important study called about afforestation in Israel. It is on our website, Nature Israel. If you go down under news and events, you can find it easily. Also, I think if you Google afforestation in Israel, Alon Rothschild, um, but or let us know, we can get it for you. It's been translated into English, and a lot of this webinar is based on that. And it's also based on a webinar that Alon gave 3 years ago on Tu B'Shvat, Tu B'Shvat 2023. Also, that webinar is on our website, and he goes into much more technical and scientific explanations of the things that I'm going to talk about now, more from a policy standpoint and from a layman's perspective. But it is that, SPNI succeeds in everything it succeeds in terms of um, advocating and implementing environmental policy in Israel. It's always policy that's scientifically based, but we succeed or fail so many times based on public engagement. And so this is something which we think there's been too little public engagement in Israel. I've been trying in my last few years on the job in SPNI to make the English-speaking public, our supporters abroad, more aware of this issue. And this is just one more way that we do this. Um, so it's been over a century, really, that afforestation has been a central pillar of the Israeli landscape, part of our own ethos. I'm sure everybody has heard the concept that Israel is one of the few nations to end the 20th century with more trees than it began. That is a truism. Most nations have undergone deforestation over the 20th century, but as we move into 2026 and beyond, we're wondering whether this is a tradition which needs to evolve. And particularly, it might need to evolve from the Tu B'Shvat planting of planting trees on Tu B'Shvat in these forests. And the goal, of course, and our concept is that trees have to be, instead of mass planted, they need to be individually planted in modern ways, hand planted and they need to be habitat specific and for specific environmental purposes or recreational purposes. And traditionally and from the beginning, the scientific reason that Israel focused on fast-growing pine trees, which are non-native to Israel, is that they quickly stabilize soil. They provide relatively quick green cover, and one of the real reasons is, as Micha Berdichevsky said in 1897, and it was a sort of a siren call for the early Zionists, the Europeans who moved to Israel and became the pillars of the state, began state building, nation building in the first decades of the 20th century. Um, Israel was, Berdichevsky said that man is none but the pattern of landscapes of his youth. For many of these Europeans from Central, Western, Eastern Europe, it was green conifer trees, and these pine trees became a sort of rule of thumb for quick ways to cover the land. And we really think we need to align these methods and this thinking with 21st century environmental thought. In many ways, people thought of tree planting as improving the landscape. In other words, that this lush green area is better than the barren area, the Mediterranean scrubland that was extant in Israel then and now. Um, by the way, I should just say that because I'm not looking at the chats, really, if you have questions at the end, we can go over them in the Q&A period. So if you have comments or questions that you want me to relate to, I will try to at the end. Easier if they're in the question and answer feature. Anyway, The challenge we have today is to honor the goals of creating nice landscapes, uh, protecting the land for public well-being, but not to do so at the expense of some of our fragile ecosystems. And what do I mean by that? I mean that there's a myth in Israel of barren land. We call it shtachim petuchim, open spaces. I always one of my earliest memories in Israel of and constant memories of Israel is when missiles fall on shtachim petuchim. That's always a good thing. It's like, oh, they didn't hit a city, they didn't anything else. Like, the missiles fall, and I'm talking about from the Gaza and from the Hezbollah and from Iran, everywhere missiles fall on Shtachim Petuchim. That's like a positive thing. Oh, you hear that on the radio. Oh, it just was landed on empty area. But Shtachim Petuchim, open spaces, are not empty. They're not wastelands. They don't need to be saving. Most of the land of Israel is comprised of Mediterranean scrublands, shrublands, grasslands, um, semi-arid lands, and of course, desert lands that are themselves carbon storing ecosystems, which are crucial to biodiversity and even carbon storage. And introducing trees into these areas and even near these areas has really the potential to harm biodiversity in these areas. And right now, we're looking at Doroma Dome. You can look at it in real life if you live in southern Israel today, or if you want to take an hour drive south of Tel Aviv. But the areas in the Western Negev and all over Israel, we'll see on a map, there's just so many open areas and ecological corridors that need to be preserved as is. And that is because these Mediterranean scrublands, it's called bata. It's a Latin word. It's unique to the Mediterranean region. That's most of Israel, but there's other habitats which tend to be rare and endangered, and they are the biggest targets for foresting. Um, the Loess Plains in southern Israel, Mediterranean shrublands, all of these areas have species that are found nowhere else on Earth. They're indigenous here. They're not found in other places. And when these areas look like this, yeah, there's some tree cover, but they're not dense forests. There's very few dense original forests in Israel. They weren't cut down by the Ottomans to turn into railroads. Um, in human memory, Israel is not a forested land in particular. Some woodlands, some stands of trees, but not the kind of dense forests that have been planted over the last really 80, 90 years. These open lands or sunny spaces and their native and flora fauna disappear planted forests are when forests are planted on them or when they're planted nearby. Um, Certain lizards, snakes, and especially ground nesting birds lose their habitats when there are tree lines that overlook these areas. And this is because ground nesting birds always have a danger by birds of prey that fly above. They fly very high above, raptors, and the the ground species are evolved to be able to protect themselves reasonably from birds of prey that are soaring very high. But when birds like crows and jays can land on tree limbs just overlooking these areas, that provides a kind of risk that the reptiles and ground nesting birds are not evolved to protect themselves against. So there's a lot of spillover on the effects and consequences of this kind of tree planting. We'll get to that in one more second. Also, the monoculture issue, where a single species dominates landscape. Some people don't call them forests; they're more like pine plantations. And one of the real problems with the pine, there's many problems with them. I mean, I've just discussed some of them. They're not native; they crowd out other species, and they affect the areas that they're planted on, and even areas nearby. But also underneath, if you've traveled in what Israel calls forest, there's very little undergrowth. Certainly, if you're familiar with forests in North America, the rich undergrowth under the canopy is such a rich ecosystem in and of itself. Pine needles tend to acidify the soil, and they suppress the growth of native wildflowers and shrubs. I remember I've been thinking this for the ever since I've been coming to Israel, that the forests have some sort of green canopy, but not much underneath. Um, Significant reduction of insects and therefore birds that the land can support when they're covered with these trees and eventually the pine needles. This is one of the maps I wanted to show you. Here in the map on the left, the natural non-forested areas. This is the Mediterranean scrubland down in the south near Beersheba. They're less plains. It's a different kind of habitat based on a different geology. But these are the forested versus the non-forested areas. You can see there's a lot of forest, and you can see in the map on the right, the green are the ecological corridors, and the yellow are the forests within the ecological corridors. Um, One of the ways to protect the land is forest. It's not always the best way for ecological corridors. It's not always the most maneuverable by some of the bigger animals. It's not their natural habitat, and that in and of itself harms some of the biodiversity. And here's an example. Here's what we're talking about. On the left is a planted forest, and on the right is a Mediterranean scrubland. That's what most of Israel looks like. When you drive around, certainly driving from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv or vice versa, this is the kind of land you can see. Yeah, there's forest, a lot of planted forest as well, but these natural areas, you can see that the seedlings and the pines, they also drift into the area and the forest encroaches. And as I mentioned before, blue jays and crows can prey on those shrubland specialists, the ground nesting birds, and their nests are far, far more vulnerable. Many of them are endangered anyway, and now they're more vulnerable because of all of these planted forests that border on Mediterranean scrublands. Um, Then there's the issue, we haven't talked about it yet, but many people, it's bon ton. It has been for a long time to talk about a billion trees and planting forests um, to combat climate change, to mitigate the effects of climate change. And indeed, I mean, trees are good carbon sinks. They're carbon storage facilities. Really, one of the eco services that trees provide. But when it comes to the heating of the globe, they do sequester carbon. But if they are darker than the land that they surround, then there's the albedo effect, where they absorb more solar radiation than the light-colored areas around them, and they create heat islands. And it's interesting in a long-term study by Yale University, and I can get you all a copy of this as well. They showed that the trees planted in the northern Negev. Look, Israel's SPNI has not been sitting on its haunches for the 75 years of our existence, just waiting for this webinar and for people to be galvanized. We've been complaining and advising and advocating for different afforestation policy for a long time. And one of the things we've pointed out is that the typical, in order to become healthy, mature trees that become carbon sinks, these JNF forests, these pine forests, they take 60, 70 years to sort of equal out in terms of sequestering more carbon than their whole planting process created. And this 60, 70 years is about as long as these trees tend to live. Um, the heat absorbed by these forests actually outweigh the cooling benefits. And it's for many landscapes, and depending on the kind of tree, it is probably more climate positive, uh, mitigates the global warming more by just leaving the land in its natural state. And these Mediterranean scrublands, in their vegetation and in their biomass, they also sequester a lot of carbon. Um, and here's the truth behind the planting. It's not gardening. This is a land after it's been planted in the northern Negev, and this is the one of the areas where twice in the last 10 years, SPNI has basically sued the JNF. We've done a bagatz. We've taken them to the High Court of Justice, to stop planting in the desert or on the very edge of the desert, just south of the Lachish region, below the 200 millimeter line, which goes sort of halfway between Beersheba and Kiryat Gat, in where it's pretty much arid land, because these deserts, they're just not meant to support. I mean, when Ben Gurion said make the desert bloom, that wasn't 100% good ecological advice. And if by blooming we mean clearing the land in these violent methods, it looks like it's been cleared for I don't know what. Um, and some trees have been planted over the years, but you can see that the land itself hasn't really recovered at all. It's 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 not ecologically sound to be planting trees in this way with heavy machinery, where the soil and the ground and the insects and all the critters in the biome are disturbed, sometimes for a long time, by heavy machinery, earth moving. It scars the landscape. It destroys the crust of the soil and seed banks, which have been evolving for millennia there. Um, and if the tree canopy ever closes, it creates a shaded environment where, as we've mentioned, sun-dependent species, plants and animals, can no longer survive. Just one more of the problems that they has there. Wow, and this is one of the most obvious and probably headline-grabbing problems of these pine plantations. Um, they were evolved to survive European winters, these pine trees, and they have a high oil content, which allows them to do that in a Mediterranean climate and in an increasingly hot Mediterranean climate. And again, at the time of the planting, climate change was not known, and it's only in the last, couple decades we've been able to measure how, in fact, quickly the globe is warming, and how the fact that Israel is warming at a pace much faster than most of the globe. And these pine trees are a huge fire risk. Um, the most, errant cigarette butt or forest fire that wasn't totally put out, lightning strikes, but mostly, human negligence, and also maybe arson, although I'm not sure arson's ever really been proven in Israel from these forest fires. But every year or two, usually in the fall, at the time the land is at its driest, these things can ignite. The pine trees and the pine cones they act like kindling, and their forest fires move faster than they would otherwise. And the beautiful thing from nature's point of view is that pine cones, when they get hot, they explode, and that's how these trees propagate. That's how a lot of trees propagate. And mostly uh, good science and good forest management shows that when forest fires happen, you don't need to replant. Forests revive themselves just fine. And in the Carmel forest fires, the really devastating ones from some 20 years ago in the Carmel Mountains, uh, they did some replanting, and they mostly monitored, and the pine trees have come back four times as densely in some of those forests than before those fires. The forest also acts as fire bridges. They help move fire around past natural woodlands into residential areas, and creating bigger fire barriers and more fire-resistant native species is part of what SPNI is advocating for, and for safety and security reasons, as well as just environmental ones. And that's basically, we have a new blueprint. So, Israel has master plans for infrastructure and for renewable energy and for housing and for industry. And we have a master plan for the forests. I'm sure you all know that SPNI's planning division is one of our biggest and most important divisions. We have urban and regional and environmental planners who sit on Israel's planning committees statutorily, including on the planning committees, the national planning committees for infrastructure and for forests. And we believe that basically all the areas that are still empty and available to become forested, and according to this blueprint, which SPNI advocated against. I mean, we wanted a blueprint, but we didn't want all these areas still empty and intended to be filled in. we're working to stop them filling in, to stop the JNF and therefore the state from filling in more areas which are natural Mediterranean scrubland and which it is envisioned will someday become planted forests. We embrace a more minimal intervention aspect of it, certainly after forest fires. It is practically criminal to do anything for the first couple of years than just watch and let the land develop according to its own natural rhythm. Some of our people, when they're out in the field in the months after these pine tree forests burn down, they're saplings in the ground and they pull them out when they're little tiny saplings. It's one of the way to thin out the pine trees in the forest and allow more native species of trees to enter. And and really, I mean, we're not advocating getting rid of the existing pine plantations, but they certainly don't need to be replanted, and we need as much as possible to curb the harmful environmental effects that they have. Um, So for the future, we propose and professional oversight of these forests, and that would be the Israel Nature and Parks Authority, the Reshut Teva V'Ganim, which uh, there is no other Western country which has outsourced its forestry service to a private organization, which is what KKL-JNF is. It exists according to a unique charter with the government of Israel, and it has its powers in that. But it is a real estate development corporation which essentially owns 12% of the land of Israel. Part of that is the forests, and not that it hasn't been well intended, but it's time to have better scientific public oversight of the whole forest scene in Israel. We are advocating for a transparent forest law to ensure that policy is rooted in public accountability, because right now there is no public accountability for what happens in our forests. It's it's a problem in Israel, and it's a unique problem faced by Israel in its forest management. And we have been advocating for the Nature and Parks Authority to take this over for a long time. But there are political interests at stake, and it's a tough battle. And as I mentioned in the beginning, there's very little public discourse on this issue in Israel. I mean, it may be coming as a big surprise to many of you, this whole issue. Certainly, your friends and colleagues in various environmental and Jewish organizations that are not SPNI might be very surprised to hear the findings in this report and the way that SPNI views planted forest, planting for pine tree plantations in Israel. So we've instituted a campaign now for the last several Tu B'Tzvat called Mindful Tree Planting. We don't want to plant thousands of trees. We laugh about if our campaign is too successful and we do get thousands of dollars, or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and thousands of trees. What we would do. We're not just planting trees, though. We're planting bushes and local shrubbery. But we say very clearly, and we believe very strongly that we have no ecological need for more industrial planted forests in our open spaces. In fact, we believe that more industrial planted forests on our open spaces is harmful to our native habitats and their endangered species. So in response, our mindful tree planting campaign, first of all, we charge $118 instead of $18 for a tree because we value the tree more. Each tree needs to be hand planted. It needs to be monitored and cared for by our own volunteers and our staff. And it needs to be the right tree in the right place with the right method. In other words, we're not taking heavy machinery to plant trees. And what we are doing is in several places, we plant specially selected native species, the Tabor oak, olive trees, acacia, fruit trees, pistachio. And we do these in several places. We do them in our rewilded wetland habitats, in our bird observatory and urban nature sites like the Jerusalem Bird Observatory and the Gazelle Valley in Jerusalem, and in the Eilat Bird Observatory. And we plant them on the grounds of our field schools. We plant them to attract wildlife, particular wildlife and birds to the areas that we plant in, and for shade and for recreation, because it's a hot country and it's important to have shade when you're outdoors enjoying nature. Um, and like I said, we're not into ripping down existing forests, but we think enough, and let's stop the afforestation and plant trees mindfully. Let's at least examine uh, as a public issue why we're just planting forests. You know, it's a little bit if you give a guy a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We've been planting forests for so long. KKL has been, they have just divisions and staff and methods, and they're just planting away. And we are saying, stop. Our open spaces need to stay open. Um, So I want to just spend the next few minutes, and I see we have lots of time left, but so I'll take a little more time to talk about what we are planting and how we're doing that. And our most exciting flagship project today in terms of nature protection is called Startup Nature. We restore nature, we don't replace it. In other words, we are returning Israel's lost wetlands into the wetland habitats, the marshes and swamps that they once were. This is a fascinating twist on Israel's founding narrative, whereby the pioneers came and drained the swamps to create farmland and land to live on. But but that was ecologically ill-advised. And in fact, I'm sure many of you know, SPNI was founded in 1953 as a protest to the decision to drain the Hula wetlands, the Hula Lake, the Hula swamps. At the time, local professors of biology at Tel Aviv University and local kibbutznikim up in that area knew that it was going to be ecological folly to drain the wetlands. They also knew that it wasn't going to be great farmland. It usually isn't underneath swamps. And what it was good land for fish farming, industrial fish farming, where a lot of the springs and rivers that were um, under the that were underwater or partially underwater um, would be able to support, and they have for 60, 70, 80 years on some kibbutzim, commercial fish farming. And what's happened in the last 20 years is that this fish farming has become less and less profitable for the kibbutzim with the price of water in Israel and with cheaper imports from the Far East. Many kibbutzim are looking for um, what to do with their fish ponds. They've tried to drain some of them and grow on them. It's not good soil for growing. Uh, and the Ministry of Energy, which wants to advance solar energy in Israel, which we're all in favor of, has let the kibbutzim build on some of the fish ponds floating solar panels. We're all for solar panels, but not so much when they take up these incredible nature assets. I mean, putting solar panels on wetlands is one of the worst places to put solar panels. And so we're in a race against the solar energy industry to some degree to rewild as much as we can. We've had some incredible success both at Kfar Rupin on the Jordan River and Magan Michael on the Mediterranean coast, leasing from these kibbutzim their industrial fish ponds, changing the topography, planting some native plants, getting rid of the farmed fish and their antibiotics and their pesticides in there, and just letting nature take its course, refilling them with fresh water after we change the topography a little bit, and the birds come back, the wildlife comes back, even the otters are coming back to our wetland habitats. We started with two of these that you can see there, the Kfar Rupin on the right side of the screen and Magan Michael in the middle of the left. But we have several other sites moving around the northern and central Israel in various stages of planning and development. All of these places are places where there were historical wetlands, swamps, and the incredible biodiversity of swamps. You know, swamps are next to rainforests. Swamps are the biggest, are the carbon, are the habitats that sequester most carbon than any other habitats. And that is what we are recreating in various places all over the world and all over Israel. And the Kabara, you can see it on the left there, down below near our Magan, right across from our Magan Michael site, is a huge area, 2,000 acres. A lot of that, which is pretty much for sure already going to be, we know it's going to be rewilded. It's just in the planning now. And that is because we have great partners, both philanthropically and especially in the the gatekeepers of Israel's nature, the Nature and Parks Authority, the Israel Drainage Authority, um, and the local councils and the kibbutzim themselves. Everybody's interested in rewilding what can be rewilded, um, because that is the best use of this land and the most important use now, not just ecologically, but also making nature accessible to people, and so people can heal in nature and people can enjoy nature. So this is our Startup Nature project where we are planting, like I said, indigenous, some trees and a lot of plants and shrubs and reeds, to get the habitats back to the way they were before they were drained for fish farms. Um, Another thing that we're doing, and again, we're not doing planting any more than we need to, but we are looking at environmentally sensitive restoration of the damaged areas from the war over the last 2 years in the northern Israel, along the northern border with Syria and Lebanon, and also in the Western Negev, all along the Gaza envelope. We are working with both of the administrations in the Western Negev and in the north to be the voice for nature and to advocate for an ecological rebuild of these communities and these regions. Um, We've been studying the damage and making assessments and working with local residents, only ever with local residents and with decision makers, to rebuild strategically and holistically, but making sure that government budgets ensure that nature is part of the rebuild. Um, it's true that people were sent to these areas in the middle of the 20th century, immigrants, to settle them and define the borders of Israel along the Gaza border and along the northern border. But the second and third generation people, the kids and grandkids of these founders of the kibbutzim and the moshavim and the communities like Kiryat Shmona and Sderot, the second and third generation of the founders of these places are there at least partly, and I would say to a large degree, because of the nature, because of the incredible natural assets that they live in and around. The rural area in the south, the pastoral open spaces of the Negev, the Western Negev. And, we've done studies, other studies have shown that in terms of hiking, Israelis love to hike. We know that hiking is a national pastime. SPNI blazes and maintains the 11,000-kilometer trail system of Israel, including the 1,100-kilometer Israel National Trail, which has been called one of the iconic trails. It's a real rite of passage. It's a thing families do, elderly people do, hiking. And in study after study, people would rather hike in open spaces with views rather than hiking in forests. Interestingly enough, as somebody who grew up in upstate New York and very familiar and loved hiking, it's true when you get above the tree line or when you're at a place where you can see the expanse opens up and you feel differently. That's a little psychology between the open spaces. But in the north, in northern Israel, in the greenest area of Israel, Eretz Plagei Mayim, though, the land of all the water sources and the land that has more forests, planted and natural, than the rest of Israel, people are up there for the nature for sure. My daughter lives on a kibbutz up there. She'd been displaced from her home for almost 2 years with her family, but they're back since late summer of last year, and working to bring new educational options to the area, and local businesses, and the government is trying to support local businesses and new mezamim, new projects, new initiatives to get various types of businesses off the ground. But diversity in business and education and housing are crucial to the rebuild, both the north and the south, but just as crucial is that nature is integrated well into these communities. You have land and access to hiking trails, to our wetlands. We're going to be rewilding wetlands right in the north. We're already working on near Kibbutz Dan, off next to the Lebanon border, and making sure that nature is part of the rebuild is really crucial to us. And so far, we're succeeding a lot. We're working through the joint, and it's Arm Elka. We're contracted to be that voice in the north, and in the south, we have a whole coalition of decision makers, the authority there, but also the local councils and the regional councils there. So it's a big task ahead of us, and some of it will involve some planting. Most of it will involve just making sure that the areas are restored to, if they need to be restored to where they were. It's much different in the north than in the south. It's But before we get to the Dome and Dome, the north is, as you know, topologically and much more challenging than the south. Environmental areas that have been burned and damaged by troop movements and missile attacks and fires, and especially by the fact that tens of thousands of soldiers were sitting in these areas, both in the north and the south, for months during reserve duty, moving around, heavy machinery, human waste, all that stuff. There is some recovery and planning that needs to be done, and we just need to make sure that people are always thinking about nature. Um, One of the projects we have now, we've got some philanthropic support, is a living trail in the Western Negev, a new trail that's going to showcase community projects, to showcase the area's resilience, including, memorials to October 7th. There's basically going to be a footbridge connection. I mean, it's, relatively small areas. We want to connect the cities, the kibbutzim, local businesses, and tourist hotspots all across the Western Negev in one walkable, flat, accessible trail. We're working to make this a reality. And it's just one of the many projects we have going on in the Negev, as well as in the south. As well as in the north. And well, that's really, I've gotten to the end of this, what I wanted to say. I'll get into the comments and questions and see what you all are saying. There's a QR code you can scan to make a donation to our Tu B'Shvat campaign, where we will plant trees in our, we will hand plant, our volunteers and our staff will hand plant trees in our field schools, which are all over the country, 9 different field schools, 3 or 4 of our urban nature sites where we work in Jerusalem and in Eilat, and and of course in our wetland habitats, Magan Michael on the coast, and Kfar Rupin on the on the on the Jordan River in the Beit Shan Valley. So thank you all. I see there's lots in the chat. I don't see the Q&A feature. Namat, can you help me out here? I'm not seeing the question and answer feature. There's even things. Maybe Nama, you could even read to me any questions. Have we been in touch with JNF about this? Here, I'll just go through the questions I'm looking at now on the.
Sure, Jay. Also, I've sent you by WhatsApp a lot of the questions if you
Oh,
want to
okay.
have
Oh,
them all
that's good to
together.
know. Thank you very much. Okay, questions. Which organization to contribute to plant in the best location? That's us. We are the organization to contribute to. I know online there's a lot of farmers that are wanting help planting fruit trees, and some of them are in places that I wouldn't recommend planting on. We don't have opinions about any Carmel the forest. I mean, the forest is a great place, but the Carmel forest, like any forest, they're if they're pine plantations, we're less into them. Variety of trees, I think I've answered that. How much ecological and social discord will be ratcheted up with Trump's real estate plan to develop Gaza coast and elsewhere? That's a political question. I don't even know how to touch that. Advice to those who had trees planted through JNF to counteract these bad effects: stop supporting the JNF's tree planting. I mean, JNF in America and in Canada and other places in the world does a lot of great stuff. They support accessibility and education and bomb shelters and all kinds of stuff. If you want to support JNF, just don't support their tree planting campaigns. When a tree is planted by SPNI, who would be ordered it? No, we're not telling people what tree they're planted and where. These are not trees that are individually assigned to different people. You're just gonna have to trust us. We're planting trees in our habitats. We're taking care of them, and we're not, It's one of the 4 or 5 species of trees that I mentioned. Uh, the Tabor pine, acacias, pistachio, um, and a couple other trees. Um, is mindful tree planting good, really needed, or just more tolerable for the environment? Well, we love trees. I mean, and trees have really important purposes. In the JBO, you can see that, and in other places, you can see we plant trees that attract birds and other wildlife. They attract butterflies and bees and insects, and it's incredible to see this at work. These trees provide environmental services and they provide shade, and that's a huge part of what we want to do, which is get people out to nature and give them some shade. Um, Forestry program, yeah, well, I mean, we do some international cooperation, but we don't do forestry. We're not in charge of forestry in any way. We just advocate for better environmental policies, and we've been advocating for this for a long time with SPNI, with the government of Israel. But so far, it's not anything that we've really succeeded on very much. We have succeeded, as I said, with a couple of court cases to the most egregious fouls in this is planting these trees in the desert and on the edge of the desert, because that is just very screwed up. And we 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 have succeeded, and JNF has stopped that, and we need to be consulted now if they're planting on their planting, but not but we don't have any actual oversight or responsibility, and we're certainly not digging up uh, any of the forests. Do they drain the swamps because of malaria? That's a good question. Yes, malaria was a problem in Israel from the beginning, but that is not really one of the reasons why they drained the Hula. By the 1950s, malaria was pretty much extinguished. Last case of malaria in Israel was 1961. It was one of the excuses they gave for draining the Hula. But malaria was something which really healthy swamps are not really sources of malaria. And we knew really how to control malaria. Public health system in Israel was great on that from the 1920s on. And it, 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 it was really more just a sort of a rationalization for draining the Hula than a reason. But yes, in the 1920s and 30s, it was a reason why swamps were drained. Um, um, We incorporate monitoring. Yes, we do monitor the non-native species, the native species. We monitor um, flora and fauna on our wetland sites, on our birding sites. Um, and why hasn't this been taken up by a political party? Is there a party which does take this seriously? Not so much. And the reason is honestly because, in my opinion, JNF is a very, very powerful cacao. That is, Karen Kettle Israel is a very powerful private organization in Israel. Like I said, it owns 12% of the land of Israel. It develops it as it sees fit. It builds. It has, be- because it leases this land, it has billions of shekels surplus every year. It uses this money to build parks and stuff that mayors and members of Knesset want in their areas. And so there's a lot of political support for the JNF. The reason that the forestry of Israel was outsourced to JNF in the early 1950s was that at the time, the JNF was basically more powerful than the government of Israel. And and it really, the government's arm was kind of forced into that agreement by JNF, which, as I said, controlled the 12% of the land and had already begun to plant forests all over the place. So, danger of malaria returning if wetlands are restored? No, we got that down. Wetlands are being restored all over the world without that. Um, Private landowners, Wendy asked about encouraging private landowners to plant native species. First of all, there are no private landowners in Israel. Less than 5% of the land of Israel is privately owned. We all lease the land from the government, even the kibbutzim lease their land. But yes, native species should be planted in anywhere anybody can plant. And certainly in parks in the cities, but on your private land, certainly we encourage native species as opposed to any kind of decorative or invasive non-native species. Um, just I'm seeing another question here online here. What does JNF say their reason? JNF says it's diversified its practices. First of all, I'd like anybody to help me on this. I've done a lot of research just in the last couple of days. There's very little online about what the forestry practices are of JNF cacao. And all they will say is that they've diversified, although they are still planting non-native pine trees. And we just think that that's, even if they're diversifying, the fact that they're still planting pine trees is wrong. And anyway, it's not just about the species and not just about the destructive method at which they plant. I want to press upon you that it's also about the forestation itself. In other words, we just don't need planted forests. Even if the trees were all native species, we don't need to take natural scrubland, grasslands, and plant forests on them. And by the way, in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in the Serengeti, there have been movements for this as well. There have been areas planted in Africa in particular that people thought planting trees would be a good idea for nature and for climate change. And studies have shown that they reduce the biodiversity in these areas. These species of large animals, small animals, and even insects, birds, reptiles go down when this places like the Serengeti, one of the more important grasslands, scrublands in the world, um, when they plant trees on it, they see a decrease in biodiversity for the reasons that we combating urban heat lions in cities. Yes, shade trees are crucial for that. Emily, thank you. I thought I said that, but yes, planting trees for shade out in nature, in the cities, in the parks, very crucial. I mean, the more trees we have in the cities, the better. But better to have, of course, the native species and not. And anyway, that is not what I mean. That's we are encouraging that. We are not discouraging tree planting in cities. Um, let's see what else. California's UC system here. What's going on there? Thank you, Tim. Yes, a lot of information about that around the world. And let's see if I missed any more questions from that Nama sent me. Um, we wish there'd be real discourse around this issue and that JNF was amenable um, to submitting itself to best forest practices scientifically, but that is not the case. And really, truthfully, there's so many environmental issues in Israel, so many burning issues, pun intended, in terms of climate change and especially in terms of the way this current government is ignoring environmental and bypassing environmental surveys and studies to get as much infrastructure work, business, agriculture, industry, uh, just creating all kinds of infrastructure, including for energy extraction, with really very little environmental surveys. And I think it's kind of taken up the oxygen in the room, as it were, of the environmental movement, kind of like a blitz, like America's seen in some ways. And this area, look, our like what we say, the fact of our trees and our forested areas, it is a fact. Let's just make sure that we keep the rest of the open spaces open for people to enjoy, but also especially for native biodiversity to be able to flourish as it should. Um, Australian eucalyptus trees. I honestly don't know about the effect of the eucalyptus trees. I haven't heard that they've been particularly, and they're relatively small stands of eucalyptus trees compared to the, thousands and thousands of acres that have been forested by the pine trees. Um, Solar panels, the best place to install them is rooftops. That's our first best place. We should utilize all residential, industrial, and infrastructure rooftops, traffic, all the land like in clover leaves and stuff. That's where we think solar panels should be. That's not enough. And in terms of where we should put solar fields, places where the nature values are less, and we have some mapping on that. it seems like the desert is big empty areas and we could put huge solar panels there. Not all desert nature values are the same. And one of our plans is to put solar fields in the Jordanian desert, trade water to Jordan from our own desalinated water. You know, we have no water shortage in Israel. We have a surplus of water, which is allowing us to bring water back to nature and sell some of it to Jordan. And they could put solar panels across the Jordan River from Jerusalem be closer to our population centers than they would be in the Arava, for example. Um, so, um, so that's it basically. I mean, I don't know if there's any further questions. You can be in touch with me. You all know where to get a hold of me. And like I said, there's a more scientific version of this webinar on our site. If you want to, if you can't find it, we can send it to you. You can also Google it. It's on YouTube. I found it on YouTube directly. Um, uh, Tree planting alone Rothschild, Alon Rothschild. Um, and no relation. And you can find that. And please support our Tu B'Shvat campaign. Thank you for your support throughout the year. And we appreciate very, very much everybody's attention, everybody's dedication, and just get the word out. And little by little, we're gonna make the world aware that we don't need pine plantations anymore. We need to preserve our open spaces, our scrublands, our grasslands. So thank you everybody very much. Thank you all for thanking me. And any other questions, happy to answer. So on offline. So thanks everybody. Have a thank you, Nama, back home, back office, and everybody. Chag Sameach, Chag Tu B'Shvat Sameach. If anybody's having an interesting Seder, we have, or you want to do next year, we have online on our site materials for a Tu B'Shvat Seder. But there's other educational materials on site. So thank you all very, very much. Thank you to our active volunteers and board members in the States, in Canada, in the UK, and thanks to everybody around the world. It's just so great to see everybody here with such good questions and such engagement. And good luck. I'll be coming to the States. Maybe I'll see some of you in New York or in Florida, especially if you're in South Florida. Over the next, I'll be there from the 18th to 23rd. Let me know. I still might have some time. Otherwise, I'll be in Naples, I'll be in Atlanta, and I'll be in the New York area. Already with a busy schedule, but contact me if you want to meet me. Maybe I can squeeze you in this time or the next time. Love to meet people abroad. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you, Naama. Chag Sameach.